Okay, let's start today's session. So today we will see about file formats and stages. So now basically like as part of today's discussion, we'll see what is mean by file formats and what types of file formats are available. So we'll see quick examples of file formats and like when to use which file format and what is kind of its characteristics of those file formats, and then we'll see how to create this file formats. So what is mean by file format first of all? So now it is also kind of a Snowflake object that we have already seen as part of the list of the Snowflake objects. We have seen this file format and stage also is a kind of a object. But what is mean by this file format? So in a simple words, what is mean by file format? If we are going to ingest some data into the Snowflake, so Snowflake should understand, right? Like what kind of data you are going to ingest into the Snowflake. We know Snowflake will support structured and semi-structured unstructured data also. So now in order to deal with this data, you need to specify something which will make sure the Snowflake will understand what kind of data you are going to ingest into the Snowflake. For example, if you are going to load CSV data into the Snowflake table, that is what your requirement. So now if you are going to ingest the data into the Snowflake, so we know all like a Snowflake is a cloud data warehouse, and we are bringing the data from multiple sources into the Snowflake data warehouse, and we are organizing the data in different layers as per the business required. So now in order to load this particular data from this source to Snowflake data warehouse table, there is something intermediate parameters required where you will specify what kind of data you are loading and what is the delimiter and what are the columns separators you have, and all these details you are going to be specify in a particular place. That place we called as a file format. So if in a nutshell, if you make it, so what kind of data you are going to load into the Snowflake, you are going to specify through this file format. So now if yeah, hello,
आले का
please go on mute.
वृंदा झोपली क्लास करते
So now the Snowflake, if you want to do any analytics, you are going to bring some data into the Snowflake and you are going to do your analytics on the data. So now here we are throughout this training program, we are going to see mostly structured and semi-structured data. So now there are different types of file formats available, so which makes Snowflake understand what kind of data you are bringing into the Snowflake. So you'll just specify this file format and you will specify this what type of data you are going to bring into the Snowflake. Then when we are loading the data into the Snowflake through, there is a command called copy command. So that is the command you are going to use to load the data into table. So when we are loading this data from this particular source to Snowflake, you are going to specify this file format and you will refer this particular file format. Then the Snowflake will understand, okay, you are going to load CSV data. Okay, make it understand and use that file format, and it will see like, okay, CSV means what, there is a comma separated, what are the field separators are there. Then it will separate those fields and it will load the data into the table. So that is the use of basically this file format concept. So in order to load or ingest any kind of data into the Snowflake, you are going to specify this file format by specifying that data type. Okay, is it clear what is mean by file format? Any queries?
No.
Okay, so now these what kind of file format supports by Snowflake is basically majorly if you categorize the data in two types, one is structured, another one is semi-structured. So in structured means CSV or TSV. TSV means tab, basically space, if it is a comma separated, or you can use vertical bar. So if any, basically these all are kind of a structured data. You mean to say by reading that file, you will be able to understand. Okay, you can put either comma or any separator, any special character and all, you can put it. But by opening that file, you will be able to read the data, you will be able to understand the data. So that is comes under structured category. Now coming to the semi-structured. So semi-structured, it is not that much straightforward as structured. So in under semi-structured, you can see JSON, Parquet, Avro, ORC, XML. These types of semi-structured data supported by Snowflake. So this is kind of a one of the SnowPro interview question as well. So during SnowPro certification exam, they will ask like Snowflake will support what kind of file formats. So these are the list of file formats. But in real time, mostly use JSON, Parquet from the semi-structured category. Some cases will use XML. But Avro ORC, I never seen, at least very rarely people like, especially working in a big data domain, they might use these file formats. But in our training program, we'll see CSV, JSON, Parquet. These are the main primary focus area. 90% of the real-time projects, if they're going with the semi-structured, they'll use these two. If it is a structured, they'll use CSV. So now, for example, so now if you see the structured, so in Snowflake, basically you can load the data and as well as you can unload the data. Unload in the sense, from the Snowflake table, if you want to unload data into your Snowflake, your local system, or if you want to transfer the data from Snowflake environment to either any cloud platform, that also is possible, but also supported by Snowflake, that we called as a unloading. So basically when we are talking about these file formats, so delimiter CSV, it will support both loading and unloading, and JSON and Parquet also, it will support both loading, unloading. So remaining, it will support only for data ingestion. That's what I'm saying. So these majorly CSV, JSON, Parquet, these are the three types of processes, file formats people will use in real time. So now if you see examples of this file formats data, how it looks like. So now if you see CSV data, in the sense, it is a kind of a comma separated, either comma separated or vertical separated. Vertical bar means straight line, or any special character, or it is a kind of a space TSV. By seeing this particular data, when you open a notepad, you will be able to read this data. Okay, this is the columns, but there is a some column separator will be there. Then you will put the remaining records. So you will be able to open this particular file and you will be able to see the data. So always, whenever we are talking about file formats, so those file name will be saved with the dot extension of that file format. If it is a CSV, dot CSV. If it is a JSON, it is a dot JSON. If it is a Parquet, file name dot Parquet. So now basically CSV, you can easily read the data and you can easily understand. Now coming to JSON and Parquet, JSON also, at least you will be able to open in Notepad and you will be able to see. At least you will be able to understand somehow. Now coming to the Parquet and other ORC Avro and all, you cannot open in even Notepad also. So it is tricky to read the data from Parquet by opening that file. So this, if you see that internally, it looks like this JSON, Parquet, ORC Avro, it's almost looks kind of a similar, but internally that alignment, kind of that within that curly braces data, that key value pairs, it will have a little bit difference. Coming to XML, the data is completely kind of a, it looks different. Always the data will be there in the form of XML tags. So now, as part of our next session, coming session, data ingestion session, so we are going to see how we can ingest the CSV data, how we can ingest the JSON data, and how we can ingest the Parquet data. So how we are going to create these file formats, how we are going to load this particular data into the Snowflake table, and how we are going to read this data also. We'll see at detail level, step by step. So don't worry about that. Now, as of now, you should understand like what is mean by file format, what kind of file format supported by Snowflake, how the data is looks like, sample. Okay, is it clear? Any doubts with respect to these three questions?
No.
So now you know, right? Like at least cut off a flavor of okay, what kind of file format supported by Snowflake. So now except CSV, remaining all comes under semi-structured category. So when to choose which file format? Now I have a one source system. Okay, so what are the differences between basically these file formats? So there are some certain features will be there, right? So based on that requirement, we can choose which is file format is suitable for that. Then I'll go with the that file format. So now, for example, my source system is a Oracle. So it means my data is storing in the form of tables. So now I want to extract the data from the table. Then I want to bring the data and I want to load the data into my Snowflake table. So this is a simple kind of a process when we are talking about data ingestion. So now, since my data is already in the structured form, so easily I can go with the CSV format, file format, and I load the data into my Snowflake. For suppose my source system is it is not having a kind of a SQL databases. It could be no SQL databases. So whenever we are talking about these NoSQL databases, is a kind of a MongoDB, Cassandra, there are different data types are available in the market. So now, if you are going to extract the data from those kind of source systems and you are going to load the data into Snowflake, then you cannot use the CSV because the data is already, it is not in a structured format. It is in a semi-structured format. So definitely I need to go with either JSON or Parquet, then only I can load the data into Snowflake. And if you go kind of any web-based applications, or kind of a Twitter, a Facebook and all, right? So those data, it is a kind of a not even a semi-structured also. So it is a kind of a, it is having combination of all kind of a data. I mean to say images. For example, if you take a Twitter, people used to put a comments also, right? So now whenever you are putting these kind of a comments and all, so it will be tricky to directly extract the data to in a particular format and load the data into Snowflake. So that's where this XML type will helpful. So especially these web-based applications, we used to call as a tagging. So whenever they're extracting the data, so behind the scenes, they will tag the data with something and they will store the data into that particular database. So when we are loading that, we'll bring that along with the tagging data and we'll extract that particular comments details and we load into that particular Snowflake table and we can do that further analysis whatever we need it on top of the data. So now if you see kind of here, so take an example of attributes. So CSV, JSON, these are the 6 file formats supported by Snowflake. So now we know Snowflake is a columnar database. Snowflake is a columnar database, right? That's what we have discussed in startings. Whereas other databases or data warehouses, it is a kind of a row related, not based on column related. But whereas the Snowflake is a column related data warehouse. So now that's where when we have seen kind of a key advantage with the Snowflake is when we are processing or when we are dealing with the semi-structured data, this performance is a kind of a 3x, 4x faster than the other data warehouses. That is a kind of a key advantage in the Snowflake because if you see, take an attribute of a columnar, so CSV and JSON is not a columnar data. But if you take a Parquet, it is a columnar data. And the arrow is not again not a columnar data, but it is a ORC. Again, it is a columnar data. So these attributes, it is a kind of a give little bit idea about these differences between these file formats, how internally it will help to the Snowflake or how internally works basically. So that is the motive of seeing these few components about these particular file formats. So don't get panic or don't get like what I didn't get what is the mean on all these kind of attributes and all. So it is a simple theoretical understanding concepts. I mean to say when we are talking about multiple file formats, so what is the difference between internally? One key difference we have seen, data itself, the storing format itself, it is a different. CSV means there will be stored with the some columnar separated, and we can easily read it. But if you go other things, it is a kind of a, it will be stored in the braces, curly braces, and it is not kind of a column separated and all. So you need to follow the different approach for the this kind of a semi-structured data. So now when we are dealing with this kind of data, so if you want to specify a particular file format, so these are the key parameters. Based on this, which is best for your use case, you can choose that file format and you can use that file format in a real-time projects. So mostly I have seen in a CSV only, even though it is a columnar format, because people will quite comfortable with the CSV. And I have seen parallelly semi-structured also, either a kind of a JSON or Parquet, not beyond that. Okay, but still you just get a flavor of what is the high level differences. If somebody is asking kind of a, what is the difference between CSV and JSON or Parquet, then you can consider these parameters and you can tell them. So for CSV, it won't support as a columnar data, but whereas a Parquet is a columnar data. Then compressible, which means when we are storing the data, so into that particular format, it will be compressed. It will be compressed. For example, if you take a CSV, any these particular file formats, so if you used to zip the files and all right, when you are zipping that file, automatically the size will be reduced. So similarly, all these data types will support this compression functionality. If you are storing some data into the particular file, and if you want to compress it, you can compress that particular file irrespective of any file format. Now coming to the split table. Split table in the sense you can split that file with multiple chunks if you want. For example, I have 1 GB file and I have already compressed and I have stored the data. But if I want to split into multiple chunks, because if processing at a time 100 GB file, instead of that, I can split that file into multiple chunks and I can parallelly process that file. It will work more fastly. That is the best approach recommended by the Snowflake also. So now, if you want to use that functionality, that also supported by all file formats. Now coming to the human readable in the sense, you will be able to read the data or not properly. Because if you open that data in a file format, you will be able to at least read the data. If you are understanding, that is a different concept. You will be easily understand the CSV data. CSV in the sense Excel, right? So now when you open the data, you'll be able to read the data clearly, column wise. Okay, this is employee number, this is employee name and all. So you can easily understand. Now coming to the JSON also, at least you can read it here and you can able to see, okay, this is the city location, under location, this is the city and this is the postal code or zip code for that. Something you can able to understand, at least you can readable. Now coming to the, as I mentioned, Parquet Avro ORC, you cannot open that file itself. You cannot read that directly in Notepad anywhere. So this is kind of a, for our understanding purpose, I have extracted from that format and I keep it in a format. But ideally, you cannot see these three file formats data directly. Again, XML, of course, you can open that XML file in your Notepad Plus and you can see that. So now it is a kind of a complex data structure, which means complexity of the data. So if you see the CSV, it is a pretty much straightforward. There is no complexity involved there. But coming to the remaining data types, there is a kind of a little bit complexity involved in that data format, how the data is aligning internally. So they will open multiple curly braces and all commas and colon, and they'll putting a key value, and this is the attribute for that key value. Like we are going to specify all these things as part of this semi-structured file formats. Now default schema named column. So default schema named in the sense, like if you take a CSV, you are going to specify that particular which schema, what is the database, and then that column is going to be extracted and you are going to read the data. But semi-structured, you need to specify any schema or any particular table and all. So you are going to get that particular object directly, object dot that particular name. So this you can see when we are reading this data from the JSON, you will understand more clearly. So you don't need to worry about that. Default schema data types also. These two components, basically when we read the data from that particular JSON data, you will understand more clarity on that. But kind of a key parameters, if somebody is asking like very rarely people will touch this. Ideally, generally people ask like, okay, if I want to load the semi-structured data, how I can load the data into the Snowflake? So this is how people will ask. So what we can say, so we need to semi-structured data, we need to deal with a different approach, right? So basically, you need to create a one SingInt table and we load the data into that variant table. From there, we'll process it. So in order to load the data, we need to use the semi-structure related file format. It is something could be either JSON or Parquet, other file. So you are going to use one of the file format from the semi-structured and you are going to ingest the data into the Snowflake. So this is the kind of a key characteristics of the file format. So now if you see the syntax of the file format, so we are talking about it is object. So object in the sense means you are going to create this particular item in the Snowflake schema database. Inside schema you are going to create this, right? So either it is also kind of a similar syntax of the table. Like if you want to create some table or if you want to create some view, what we are doing, create or replace, if not exist, table name, view name, similarly file format. So create or replace file format, if not exist, that file format name and type. This is what I'm saying. So if you are going to bring what kind of data, and you Snowflake should understand before loading the data into the table, right? So here we are going to specify that what kind of data we are bringing into the Snowflake. Either it could be CSV or it could be JSON or it could be Parquet, XML, whatever it may be. So you are going to specify that particular file format type here. Then compression is kind of a, either you can give a, you can leave it to Snowflake. So Snowflake will automatically, based on that particular file type, data type, it will compress that. And if you want to specify some particular compression methods, that also is possible. Snowflake will support these kind of a compression methods, gzip, bz2, broadly, GSTD. So these and all we know we are not going to use. Most probably we'll give it as a auto, so that Snowflake, as it has intelligence, it can compress that by default. But there are specific cases if you want to particularly compress, especially when we will go with these other compression methods. Like if you are unloading, if you want to compress, maximize that storage and all, maybe probably instead of gzip you can go with other compression methods. But ideally, mostly either gzip, auto will use it. Now coming to the record delimiter. So now for suppose if you are going to specify CSV, then you need to put the record delimiter, right? Is it a comma or it is a special character or it is a space, whatever it may be, you are going to specify that particular delimiter. Then the Snowflake will understand, okay, this is a separate record and this is a separate record. So now column wise, when you're talking about CSV, we are going to put some delimiter, right? So that delimiter we are going to specify here as a record delimiter. Then coming to the skip header. So what is mean by skip header? So what is mean by skip header? For example, now if you see here, this employee ID, name, last name, birth date. So these are the column headers. Okay. In Snowflake, I already created this table with employee ID, name, F name, birth date. Okay. So these columns already present in that part of the table. Now, when I'm going to load this data, if I'm not specifying anything, what Snowflake will do, Snowflake will consider this first line also, it's considered as a record and it will ingest the data into table. Then it will throw sometimes error, or sometimes along with the data, this header part also will be ingested into the table. So that is not the expected, right? Basically, I want to load only data, not a column names under. So this skip header parameter will be helpful for that. If you specify skip header 1, then the first line automatically Snowflake will skip that. It will ignore it, so that it will take from second line onwards and it will load the data into the table. Now coming to the skip blank lines. If there are any blank lines are there between the data records, between the records. So if you set this true, Snowflake will just ignore that spaces. Otherwise, maybe in our table also the same space will be loaded. So in order to avoid this, so especially if you're talking about these file formats, hell number of parameters are available. So I'll share that link so you can just have a look at. But we are not going to use all those parameters in a real time. That is a kind of a reference. Snowflake file formats will support those many parameters, but these are the key parameters whatever I have included here in a real-time project. Whenever you are creating a file format, so these are the key parameters you are going to use it. Then coming to the escape, if there are any characters, like if you inside the data might be you have some underscore or you have some special characters, so you need to escape that character. You can specify that particular value here as part of that escape. Now in space, in the sense between the columns or between the records, if there are any extra spaces there, you want to remove that spaces, because when we're extracting the data from the source systems, we don't have any guarantee we are getting the data in a exacted format however we want it. There is no guarantee because they're exporting the data from their source system and they're placing the data into the file format. So when they're exporting the data from the table to file format, there are certain things, it will be kind of a mismatch, might be null values will come or might be spaces will come. So we need to be little bit careful when we are loading the data into the Snowflake. So this is the place where we will handle these all small things. Now coming to the field optionally enclosed by. So for example, some places, if you go to that particular data, we'll put the data into double quotes, right? If you see here, look, this particular name, we place it as a double quote. So now, similarly, if there are any particular field value was enclosed with the double quotes, you need to specify the Snowflake. Otherwise, it won't consider, it might be ingested into the table in a wrong way. So that will make sure these things, if especially if you are 100% sure there are any data is coming in a single quotes and all. Now, other parameter is null. If there are any value is coming as a null for a particular column, so you can specify that null. If then you can specify what value you want to populate it. Error on column count mismatch. For example, now I have a here 4 columns are there, but in my table I have a created a 5 columns. So when I'm trying to ingest the data into the Snowflake table, definitely it will fail. Definitely it will fail. It will throw error. But my requirement is I have created here 4 columns. In Snowflake also I have created a 4 columns table also. Everything is looks good. And if you see here, the column separated as a comma is there, comma is there. So but when coming to the data, in one of the last name, it has a kind of a 2 names with a comma separator. So the name itself having a 2 names, by mistakenly 2 names came, so there is a extra comma came. So now what Snowflake will think, since you have mentioned comma as a separator, so for that first name or last name also having a 2 values with the comma separator, so Snowflake will try to consider that extra value as a separate column, and it will look at for the 5th column in the Snowflake table and it will fail. It will throw error in a incorrect number of columns or mismatching, something like that. Now, if you want to avoid such kind of scenarios, so for example, you have 1 lakh records are there. There may be only 1 or 2 records having like that. So if like if you are trying to execute that copy command, so it will fail and it won't load any data into the Snowflake table. But if you want to exclude those two and if you want to load the data, so this parameter you can set as a false and automatically it will just ignore and it will try to load the data. And empty field as a null. So empty field as a null in the sense, if there are any empty values are there, if you want to consider those values as a by default null, you can set this parameter and automatically Snowflake, if find out come across any null values, it will treat as a by default null and it will load as a null into that particular table. So this is a briefly about file format parameters. This is how you are going to create a file format, and this file format creation we will do as part of the data ingestion, because this data ingestion, when we are talking about this file format stages and data ingestion, all three coupled together, and it is a kind of a, when we are dealing with that, then only you will be able to understand clearly. Because when we are talking about loading data into the Snowflake, these are the prerequisites. file format creation and stage creation as a kind of a prerequisites. So we'll see demo when we are doing the data ingestion part. But is it clear about that file format? What is the basic syntax of file format? What are the key parameters we'll use as part of the file format creation? And what type of file format supported by Snowflake? Any doubts?
No, sir.
Is it clear, right? So we will see this when we are creating this file format as part of a demo. So don't worry about that too much, but try to understand this. I'll share the details, go through the details and come up with your queries if you have anything. What about others? Is it clear? Anybody has any confusion or anybody has any queries? No questions?